Right, hello, again. This is the second part in a series of videos of me looking at the upcoming weapon mastery system and speculating/analyzing what the crossover weapons might enable for the various elite specs. If you want more details, check out the first video where I talked about the light armor classes, because today we're doing the medium armor classes. The one disclaimer I will repeat from last time, because otherwise somebody will bring it up, is that I'm coming at this from the exclusive perspective of a PvE player. You just don't want the person who doesn't set foot in PvP more than once a year to talk about PvP theorycraft, okay? So everything I say applies to only PvE. And in fact, I'm looking at this primarily from a PvE group content endgame perspective, so raids, fractals, strikes, that sort of thing. I will bring up open world and other elements here and there, but the thing is, just as I said last time, you can kinda make anything work in open world, so if you feel like something's interesting, go ahead and try it. That is just a line of reasoning that I don't want to have to repeat every single time, because that's completely redundant. Anyway, let's look at some weapons, shall we? First off, with Thief, there isn't actually that much to talk about for Staff and Rifle. For Staff, it's probably just not going to be good on anything else. There's just no synergy between Staff and Deadeye, unless the sneak attack would be massively overstated, and the Staff sneak attack has never been particularly good. It's a CC utility thing, so it's probably never going to be better than Dagger, while still having very little utility, while still being melee locked, while still animation locking you just as much, if not more than Daggers. So if you really enjoy Staff, it might be a fun solo weapon, but it's not going to pick up any meta relevancy. And I don't even want to talk about Scepter, because Scepter has no business running power builds. There's just nothing else supporting that in Scepter, so yeah. Moving on, Rifle is the exact same deal, just in reverse. Rifle is essentially the antithesis of what Daredevil wants to do, which does create at least a very funny image of the Daredevil dodge still applying while you're kneeling. I don't even know how that works. I did not try that in the beta because Rifle is designed around setting up big sneak attacks, and that's not what Daredevil does, so that's not happening. And yet again, same deal with Scepter. Exclusively a power weapon, has no business to be run on Scepter. Moving on. Finally, Scepter gives us something worth talking about, because Scepter is actually an independently good weapon. Hooray! And it does have a lot of potential for Condi builds, both on Daredevil and Deadeye. Those are both not performing amazingly right now, but Scepter is actually just really, really good, and it gets to avoid the forced movement issue that both of them have. For those that don't know, there is a Condi Deadeye build that uses pistol primarily, and uses the 3 flip over, which you have to get into melee, then teleports you out, and then you do like a repeater shot that does a bunch of bleeding. And that's kind of the idea behind it, but actually playing that as more than just a fun gimmick one-off can get really annoying and really inconsistent, and Scepter doesn't run into those issues. I'm not entirely convinced it's going to be better on Daredevil, just because Daredevil has a heavy build focus on bleeding right now, and obviously the Dagger 3 does a lot of bleeding, but I can equally imagine just shifting to a more like generalized Condi duration thing with Nightmare Runes. That shouldn't be that hard of a switch to make. It's very easy to justify by virtue of all of the poison that Thief has access to and the venoms, so I can see Scepter giving a lot of new life to Condi Thief just in general. Right. Then moving on to Engineer, where there's a lot of complicated stuff going on. So first off, Hammer, and you're gonna have to bear with me for this one. I don't think it's particularly good on Power Hollow as it's currently being played. That's because Power Hollow currently relies on the Enhanced Capacity trait, which gives you 150 heat maximum, which in turn adds a lot of damage to the sword. And that's kind of a core synergy of the build, and obviously that does not work with Hammer, because there are no additional effects on any other weapon based on heat, it's just sword. However, there used to be another build for Power Hollow that used Photonic Blast module and ran an additional kit. PBS Hollow or 2-kit Hollow, whatever you want to call it, due to like just generally falling behind because the other version of the build that's currently being run kept getting buffed and the Photonic Blast module variant didn't. But Hammer could breathe some new life into the PBS version of the build just by virtue of having a stronger power weapon to work with than Rifle, because I suspect that Hammer is going to be the best overall power weapon on Engineer, and so that has some potential there. By the same token, I think it's going to outright replace Rifle for Power Mech, just because Hammer is a higher damage weapon than Rifle. That's the long and short of it. That's not going to change much, but it might finally lead to Angeli actually having choices when it comes to their weapons, which is a rarity, since Rifle still comes with the benefits of being ranged, and Rifle has the benefit of having that long push and the long immobilize, which can be quite valuable in certain fights at least, but then Hammer might make for the overall higher DPS version, so you actually get some trade-off choices and some utility swaps in terms of engineer weapons, which again, you normally never get to do. And I'm looking forward to that. That's gonna be quite nice. Sword. Yeah, sword's not doing great. Remember the trait that I talked about when I talked about Hollow Hammer? Yeah, that's kind of integral to sword being viable. Without the buff from that trait, sword just kind of a bit meh, especially because there is no power offhand to go with it. You normally run pistol, but just because you don't have another option, in fact, pistol is such a small DPS increase that many people just run shield instead purely because of the CC. And so I don't think there's any scenario in which sword can keep pace with hammer or rifle outside of Hollowsmith. Again, might be really fun for personal gameplay, particularly because the sword 3 gives you quickness and the leap finisher, which gives it fantastic synergy with both of the other elite specs, but only for like solo open world gameplay type of things. Really, if you're a Sword NG fan, you should be upset that SOTO is giving you shortbow instead of a power offhand, because that really could have made Sword more broadly applicable, and I really hope we finally get a good power offhand for Engineer next year. Please, ANET, we are desperately missing one. Anyway, moving on to Mace. Mace, as of recently, is no longer better than Pistol for Condi builds, just in general because Pistol got buffed. So it's probably not going to be too relevant as a DPS option. In theory, you could use it on Condi Hollow, but it doesn't really add much over Pistol. It adds a little bit of extra CC, but in turn it melee locks you, so it's also additionally more reliant on confusion, which is not a great place to be right now. So I don't see Mace making a big splash on Hollow. However, Mace is going to be absolutely fantastic for specifically Heal Scrapper. And I mean fantastic. Here's the thing. Mace 2 does everything Hammer 3 does, but better. At least for Heal Scrapper. Because it is also a leap finisher, but it is easier to use, animation locks you less, and it has an overall shorter animation time. And because it's 2 different casts, if somebody misses one of the procs, they're not liable to also miss the second one. It makes you press buttons slightly more often, but a lot of people have complained about having to use Hammer and having to specifically use the Hammer 3, because of just how long the Hammer 3 animation locks you when you're playing any version of Quickness Scrapper, and I think Mace is going to resolve that outstanding issue. Not to mention, it also allows you to provide Vigor, it also has the barrier on it, it leaves Shield open for you, which gives you super easy access to protection, and has additional utility on it. It is an enormous upgrade for Heal Scrapper, and could genuinely put it far higher in the imaginary ranking of the healers. Mace really does resolve so many outstanding issues with Heal Scrapper, it's amazing. Despite the usability increase, I doubt it's going to see much use for Power Quickness Scrapper, just because Mace is a far weaker power weapon than Hammer is. Hammer is just so much better for the damage side of things, so it's likely not affecting that. Moving on to Ranger, which, starting with Staff, Quickness Heal Untamed? Quickness Heal Untamed, I guess. So the recent Druid changes have pushed Might Generation far more into the core skills and out of relying on Celestial Avatar. And I wonder now if that was very deliberate in the design, and if that was designed with the intention that Untamed's gonna get Staff, and because of that it's gonna have access to an actually good healing weapon, which before it just didn't. Before all you could really do was work with blast finishes and water fields, which, to be fair, is a lot of healing that Ranger can do, because somehow they just do that really fantastically. But if it is better if you have a direct source of healing, and Staff is one of the best for that. I doubt it's going to make Quickness Heal Untamed really good, but I think it's going to make it a lot more functional than it is now. And it puts it in a position where it's much easier to see what's missing from it and what they might be able to add on top of it, so that it becomes like a real meta contender. As for Soul Beast, yeah, I don't know what you're using Staff on Soul Beast for. There really isn't anything. Yes, there are some beast skills that like have healing on them, but you don't get boons. And if you would want to play extremely full heal ranger, then druid just does it better. So yeah, whatever. Dagger, meh. So mainhand Dagger is meta on Condi Soul Beast right now, but Ranger already has so many excellent weapon choices, especially when it comes to Condi builds, that baseline Dagger, even if it will be a minor upgrade, that's all that it is, a very minor upgrade. It might be a minor buff for Condi Druid, but that's not really all that exciting. However, there is a catch to this, in that how the ambush skill for Dagger was tuned in the beta is insane. It applies 3 stacks of bleeding and 5 stacks of poison with a base duration of 8 seconds. Yes, I checked that in-game again, just to make sure it was correct. And that is crazy. Condi Untamed is a build that currently only exists in theory, because there is inherently a lot of synergy for just Condi builds and Ranger in general. It's one of the things that Ranger just inherently does extremely well. And as I said, Ranger has a bunch of fantastic Condi weapons. But right now, Untamed really doesn't add anything to Condi builds besides like the Untamed Beast skills, but if I'm remembering correctly, but don't quote me on that, those work off of your pet's stats, so that doesn't even really count. And like the DPS trait, the Symbiosis one, does not apply to Condi damage, that's only flat damage. But the one thing they can work with, theoretically, is the Quickness trait, which gets you more ambush casts. But right now, there really isn't a weapon with a fantastic Condi ambush. Shortbow and Axe are just a bit undertuned in that department, and they're also just really slow and kind of unreliable. Dagger does not have those problems, and if Dagger fills the role of just having a really, really good Condi ambush, that might push Condi Untamed into genuine viability and like genuine meta relevance, which would be quite nice, because Condi Untamed was left behind a bit when they did the quote-unquote Untamed rework. As for Hammer, Hammer is just inherently a really weird weapon. I don't know if it's been implied, confirmed, if we saw this in the beta, I have no idea. But people have been putting around the idea that you can, if you use Hammer on non-Untamed, that you can individually pick which version of the skills you'll be using, or at least that you can pick between going to combat in the Unleashed version of Hammer or in the base version of Hammer. Just makes me wonder how that is going to work exactly and how they're going to keep that for release, regardless of how they're doing it in the beta. But no matter what, I have my doubts that it's going to be better than the core power options. In the same sense as how Dagger isn't a massive upgrade inherently over any other Condi version, Hammer wouldn't be either, just because Longbow, Greatsword, Sword, all of those are already really, really good. And Hammer on Untamed benefits massively from having 2 separate cooldowns on the base state and the Untamed state of its skills, essentially giving it almost twice as many DPS skills as any other Ranger weapon. Without that, it's not really that good. It might be a fun option for Power Soul Beast, but there's just nothing special there. However, it does have a very hilarious interaction with Condi Druid of all things. So for those that don't know this, the central thing that makes Condi Druid work is not the trait that adds conditions to Celestial Avatar, though of course that helps. It's Blood Moon, which makes you do bleeding every time you CC. Hammer has a ton of CC on it. And so what you can in theory do is use Hammer to repeatedly proc Blood Moon, and whenever you don't have any CC skills left, you go into Celestial Avatar and use the skills there, then come out of CA, use whatever came off cooldown, and then you swap weapons. And then before you go into CA next time, you swap back to Hammer and do the whole thing over again. That could, in theory, very cleanly slot into the rotation if it works out. Obviously, that has to be tested by someone who's better at this than me, but it's a very, very funny interaction that could potentially do something. However, it might also just do nothing at all. That is entirely possible, and I'm almost expecting it to. But I do kind of want to try it just because that sounds so funny to me. And that's the end of the medium weapons. Heavy classes are coming out later this week, probably around like Friday. Normally I do my uploads on Saturdays, but I might push this forward to Fridays just, because we are so close to the SOTO launch. So if you do want to catch that, consider maybe subscribing. I still have trouble asking for this on record, but I'm a statistics nerd and I can see the difference it makes for the video. Same thing goes if you want to leave a like, would be really cool. And yeah, maybe see you in the heavy video. Till then, goodbye.